Thank you very much, Lou. My mic working? Good. Thank you to Toro for having us out today. I think that it's very valuable to hear from the water industry. So many of the industry in Southern California and across California is closely tied to water, but no more so than the industry that you're in. Without our product, your product really doesn't look as nice or do as much as it really should. And so we have a relationship that's much closer than most other industries in the state. But I think one of the things I'd like to do is start off by giving you an idea as to where it is that we get our water to provide to you. And so I want to orient you a little bit to the state of California, show you where we get our water, and give you a little background on this. That little yellow area down in the lower part of the state, that's the Metropolitan Water District service territory. Looks small, almost meager, compared to the geography of the rest of the state. But half the state's population lives in that area. 1 in 20 Americans lives in that area. And as you can see from where we get our water supplies, over the half of the water that's served in that area is coming from outside the area, from hundreds of miles away, coming through aqueducts, from the Colorado River and also from the Sacramento River Delta. You see there the LA Aqueduct, first aqueduct bringing water into Southern California, but that's owned by the city of Los Angeles. It's not the Metropolitan Water District's aqueduct. Our first aqueduct is this one that runs out to the Colorado River. It's that red one there heading east. And as you're going to hear a little later, we have some folks at the federal government to answer to with regard to our water supply from there. And although their documents don't say the same thing as our state constitution, essentially it means the same thing. They expect us to put the water to a reasonable and beneficial use. And then the second large aqueduct that comes into Southern California from Metropolitan's perspective is the State Water Project. And unless you've been hiding under a rock with regard to water issues in the past 3 years, you'll know that we've had a number of troubles with that water supply. The Colorado River has had its hydrologic issues, and we've had a protracted drought. And you'll hear a little bit more about that later on. But the State Water Project also has environmental issues related to it, and by court order, we're actually have a reduction in the supply from the Sacramento River Delta by about 30% as far as exports coming to Southern California. And that's important because where we had designed a system around having sufficient supplies for reasonable and beneficial use here in Southern California, when you knock one of the legs out from that three-legged stool, where it's Colorado River, State Water Project, and local supplies, you see that we can end up with a real problem very quickly. Did want to just run through the local supplies, just a reminder. We get we get water from the LA Aqueduct, get water from groundwater production. We actually have great aquifers here in Southern California. Groundwater recovery, cleaning up marginal groundwater basins in Southern California, and there's a lot of that going on out here in the Inland Empire because this used to be much more of an agricultural community. As it's converting to homes, some of the agricultural impacts to the groundwater basins are being cleaned up, and those waters are being put to higher and more valuable uses. Recycled water, and you're going to hear me talk about this quite a lot. Recycled water is really a resource for the future, and as landscape irrigation professionals, this is an area that is very important that we all understand and that you know how to use this resource. Conservation, one of the basic aspects of my program and what we're here to talk about today. By the time we get to the year 2020, about a quarter of our water supply is actually going to be derived from conservation. In other words, we're not going to be using a quarter of the water that we otherwise would be using if it weren't for the fact that we are doing all the things that we should be doing to use water wisely. And the question that always comes up to me, what about seawater desalination? And where it is a backstop in Southern California is a resource that we have an option to. At $1,200 to $1,600 an acre foot, which are the reasonable ranges of the cost of that resource, it's one that we're not going to see as a large addition to our water supply in Southern California. It will be a meaningful one, but not replacing any of the supplies that we talked about. Nowhere close to the impact that conservation will have going forward. So what are the emerging trends and challenges in California? Last year, landmark legislation was passed in California known as the Delta Package. And as one of the pieces in that legislation, there was actually none of this legislation was passed in regular session last year. It was actually passed as in extended session, called back by the governor. And if you look for SB X 77, SB, Senate Bill X, extraordinary session, 7-7, you will see that there is a call by the legislature, state policy now, to for urban users to cut back their water use by 20% off of a baseline use by the year 2020. That is something that, actually Fiona and I were just in Sacramento yesterday. I was meeting also on Tuesday with some environmental groups. It is the topic of discussion at almost every meeting that you'll go to in Southern California or in California with regard to water, how we're going to achieve that goal, but it's now state policy. You as an industry are also working with the new water efficient landscape ordinances. We have a new model landscape ordinance in the state of California that has an expectation for anything that new or rehabilitated. Any permit that you pull has to meet new water efficiency standards, and that was going to drive a new market for new products, and those products, some of them are on display here today, and I encourage you to understand them because the efficiency factors on those devices are going to be the only way that we can hit the efficiency standards in that legislation. There are some expectations on existing landscapes. How that's actually going to hit the road, we don't exactly know, but again, driving back to the top of the slide, if we're going to hit that 20% reduction, we're going to have to figure out ways of addressing landscapes that are being partially rehabilitated, partially improved, but not a permit-pulled activity. That's going to include changing out sprinkler heads, maybe changing out controllers, but some way to drive those existing landscapes that were not designed for the kind of efficiency that we expect today, how to drive those landscapes up into the range that we need. You're going to have retail water rate structures that are going to recognize indoor water uses as having a higher value than outdoor water uses, which basically means that you're going to see higher costs or implied higher costs for landscape irrigation water. That means that your customers are going to be that much more interested in making sure that those that water is being used as wisely as possible. And here I'm going to drive this home on as many different slides as possible. Recycled water. We are going to have to learn how to deal with this and use this resource to address almost all of our non-potable needs. Landscape is going to be on the forefront of that process. We have certain areas in Southern California that are already using that water for groundwater recharge, but as populations grow and more water is being drawn from rivers and then returned to rivers as effluent from cities, you're going to see that there are going to be questions that come up having to do with the issues related to taking recycled water to potable uses. So you're going to be on the front end and being pushed out ahead, and we're here to help, but we're going to have to make sure that we're all in agreement that landscapes are going to have to start seeing the use of recycled water if we're going to make it to our goals in the future. And these are not mindless goals. In the end, in order to make room for that 50 million Californians that we're expecting, and for the growth that we all need for California to be as vital as it has been in the past, we're going to need to be able to get there through water efficiency, making the existing resources stretched. I'll run through some of these other challenges a little quicker. We have municipal stormwater permitting issues that are coming up, large landscape areas, older communities, and you know this. This is this is your bailiwick. Older communities were not designed for efficiency, and so you end up with issues. New communities are. They're you know, it's almost, you know, right in your wheelhouse. They're smaller lots, but larger common areas, and those larger common areas are often much better equipped to handle recycled water and really well-maintained control systems. Where are your opportunities? Well, improved irrigation efficiency, and I'll tell you that there's so much of that has to do with management, but since I can't be out there and you can't be out there holding everybody's hand that happens to have the key to a controller, you almost have to make it as to use the term, idiot-proof for the common user. So equipment is going to be key. Putting the right equipment in up front is going to be necessary. Again, increased use of recycled water. I'm going to hit it on almost every slide. And when you're looking at designing new landscapes, you're going to want to eliminate hard to irrigate areas. There are all kinds of rules regarding this in both the model landscape ordinance and the local implementations of it. But more than ever before, we're going to have to talk about how we deal with utilitarian uses of turf versus other types of landscapes. I like green. If you were to drive by my house, I'm not exactly sure I want this broadcast, you'll see it's very green. But it's smart in the ways that it reaches hardscaped areas, that it does, and that there are borders and perimeters, and those are the kinds of things that we're just going to have to remember every single time we design a new landscape in California, that we're addressing that. And then again, design for recycled water. Even if the recycled water isn't there, when you design for recycled water, you're basically separating a potable use from a non-potable use. The drinking water supply from those supplies that don't have to be drinking water quality. You're saving all kinds of things having to do with infrastructure and cost on the water utility side. We recognize that in the incentives that we give for the equipment that you're putting in. But also on the other side, you're creating the opportunity for recycled water to create not a 10, 20, or 30% efficiency in that landscape, but 100% efficiency. One of the big gains in last year's legislation was that recycled water, for the first time in California's history, is now recognized co-equal to conservation. And if you think about it, if you can put a landscape on recycled water, that's 100% efficient. Now, that obviously requires a different plumbing regime, but it's highly valuable. And not only that, but as we go forward, recycled water is going to be as dear to us as potable water. In other words, the efficiency of recycled water and the use of it is going to be just as important. And also, because it's a product which is highly regulated, you're going to be under more scrutiny to make sure that there isn't runoff, urban runoff. And so what you end up with is a requirement to design those landscapes as efficient or even more efficient than if you were using potable water. So some of the other areas, if we're going to be looking at improved irrigation efficiency, some of the areas that this group I'm sure is very aware of, but in the general public is not. There's still, one-off homes being built without pressure regulation in the irrigation system, which basically for many products destroys a lot of the efficiency that we'd like to see. There are new products, though, out there that also regulate the pressure actually in the irrigation system, and those are good as well. Also, the irrigation system controllers, smart controllers, and we have incentives for them. I left my list over there, but you really ought to go over and talk to Eric if you get a chance. Find out about the incentives. Find out about the incentives. Metropolitan gives incentives based on our avoided costs for the water supply, but we are just one level within Southern California. To give Fiona and I work very closely together on many levels here in the state, but she is a customer of my customer. And so there are multiple levels of water industry that's standing by, ready to help, ready to offer their value on the table to help these things happen. In the area of nozzles, if you go out there, and I'm glad that this actually comports to what I heard this morning, you'll hear some discussion out there about the efficiency of what you'll see in the field when you go out there. What's in the field right now, on average, is about 50% efficient as far as the way that it lays down water. The model landscape ordinance requires it to be up around 71%. That's a huge improvement that's needed, and there are easy fixes. If you get to the customer and they understand what it is that they need to do, and you can convince them to make that small capital investment, we're here to stay off some of that cost or participate in some of that cost. But overall, and I think that Western actually has an incredible program where they're actually giving away sprinkler heads, and that's a very valuable model for us to be looking at. But again, those are ways of improving efficiency. Here's my slide. Recycled water. Again, it's recognized as a full offset to water demand. And we can't say that enough. The model landscape ordinance also allows that when you use recycled water, you're allowed to use 100% of ETO. Technical term, I'm assuming that some of you know what that is, but basically it's enough water to grow the turf that so many of your customers are demanding. But recycled water allows that to happen without any of the other stipulations being placed on it. And again, as I said, it's not subject to that 20% reduction per capita demand by 2020. We need to improve management practices, but again, this has to do with the timing and duration of irrigation. There are some technologies out there to help on that. I also have, and this is probably in your presentation, some resources here for you to look at as far as the use of recycled water and the impacts of salinity. When you incorporate good design into landscapes, you can eliminate the hard to irrigate areas. There's some things up here that I have to tell you, my staff knows much better than I about how these things apply, but they actually came out and showed me that although I have a buffer zone between my greenscape and my hardscape, they came out one day and measured it and found that it wasn't what it was supposed to be. So I'm going to have to convince my wife that we have to dig back about another foot or two on the turf side. But it's important to know that when you do these design elements and you recognize that they're part of state law and local ordinance, that you are building in perpetuity the water efficiency into the landscape. This is where I'm not sure where Lou got off to. He's over. He took off his jacket. That's why I don't see him. There is a hard bite to some of this. If you have non-utilitarian turf, there are going to be some limitations as to how you use that. There are some turf species that allow you to use more turf, but if you're dealing in a non-utilitarian application of turf, in other words, if you're not doing sports fields or something along those lines, and you're not using recycled water, you're pretty much going to be limited to somewhere below 50% of the irrigated area for turf, probably closer to 40%. And against the backdrop of what we had been seeing as far as building practices, that's not nearly the same. So you're going to also be looking at the way of applying water in areas that are not the typical what I call fence line to fence line turf applications. There are maximum allowable uses of water in new landscapes, new permitted landscapes that just preclude it. The numbers just don't add up unless you're doing some other way of making up for it, and that usually has to do with the turf species that you're using. And again, we recommend that you really think about designing for recycled water. Here are some side-by-side comparisons. I'm not sure how well they come up here, and your slides might be small there, of two buildings in close proximity to each other. Both beautiful, I think, both well done. But the one on the left is guaranteed to get your shoes wet 10, 15, even 2 hours after they've properly watered that lawn. And so essentially, you're going to have to think about those buffer zones. So what is the role of industry? First off, thank you again to Toro. The education, the professional education and training of folks is very important. Irrigation managers, making sure that they understand what the expectations are, and also we really want to push the issue of we need to make sure that you are all well-versed in the use of recycled water. Now comes the role of the frontline folks, educating property owners, managers, governing boards, elected officials on how vital this is. You know, we have done such a great job in Southern California providing water for the growth and the dream of Southern California that people forget that without our imported supplies, half of us would have to leave. And so if we're going to make room for, and again, in our area where we have 19.5 million people, another 6 million people to move in here if we're going to continue to carry half the state's population, we're going to have to figure out how to stretch the resources that we have even further. And I think that, again, on the front line, we want to ensure that specifications and contract terms support appropriate design and water use efficiency. And this is where, and I get this when I go out and talk with the CLCA, California Landscape Contractors Association. They go, gosh, you know, you're doing all this stuff, and how do I differentiate myself from the mow and blow guy? How do I show that this is more important? And I say, with your professional training, it will show up on the water bill. Water rates are going to support you. The new model landscape is going to support you. All of these things are going to differentiate your products, your services, from those that are going to come in and try and knock you off on price. And I think that that's an important thing to think about as far as your business model going forward.